My name is Ashley Bodkins, and I'm with the University of Maryland Extension Office here in Garrett County, the westernmost part of Maryland. And today we are going to be talking about planting your vegetable garden. I have my colleague also joining me today, Miss Sherry Frick. Do you want to give a quick shout out?
Sure. It's good to be here with you today, Ashley. I'm the Master Gardener Coordinator in Allegheny County, Maryland, and the Agriculture and Natural Resources Educator there. So it's a pleasure, as always, to join Ashley.
Thank you. So with that, we are going to go ahead and get started. So who's excited about vegetable gardening? I know I am. Vegetable gardening is one of my favorite things to do, especially when we have a pretty sunny day like today. So Miss Sherry is going to give us a quick introduction to University of Maryland, and then we will move right along to the heart and soul of this presentation.
Sorry, I was muted, so nobody heard that. So I was just saying we like to put this slide in here so that you know who we're representing. The Master Gardener program is part of the University of Maryland Extension, which is in turn part of the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources for the University of Maryland. Now, every state in our union has got a land-grant university, and those land-grant universities will have extension programs. So you should be able to find a Master Gardener program in your state if you're interested in learning more about becoming a Master Gardener. I think that's about it. Is there anything else you wanted to add, Ashley?
No, I think that covers it very well. You can always seek out your own land-grant university if you have any questions if you don't live in the state of Maryland. You can always search that in a Google search or a search engine. Just put land-grant university or cooperative extension with your state's name. All right, so we're gonna, this is just an overview slide to let you know what we wanted to cover during this presentation today. So it's all about vegetable gardening and planning in general. So sometimes, you know, the first step in vegetable gardening can be a little bit intimidating as far as what do you want to grow, how are you going to grow it, what does that plant require. So this is just an overview. We're going to talk about setting your own goals, how to choose, you know, where to grow your vegetables if you want to do it in a raised bed, a container, or maybe in the ground, and talk about the advantages and disadvantages to each one of those systems. Then we're going to talk also about the basics, so your soil, the pH, the sun, the water, and your hardiness zone. We're also going to talk about the best method for how to plant your seeds, if you should start them inside early, if you should buy transplants, or if you should direct seed them. Your timing is also very important, even though we're getting a little bit here in our area, we're just getting into gardening season, but for those of you that live in a little bit of a warmer climate, you might already have started your garden. So timing is really important, and then we're going to end the day with how to maximize your harvest, how to get the most out of a small space. So we're going to talk about some things like succession planting and vertical growing. So we hope you're as excited as we are, because we can't wait to get started. So what are your goals? I have to tell you a quick story. When I was growing up, I started vegetable gardening with my parents when I was probably 5 or so. We used to get the Gurney's catalog. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's a seed catalog. And every year, my brother and I would get the chance to buy one of their $1 seed packets. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but I'm pretty sure that with Gurney's, if you spent $1 on this seed packet, it was just a mixture of all different kinds of plants. So there would be vegetables, there would be a couple green beans, there would be some flowers. I think they just went through and cleaned out whatever machines they were filling that day. But anyway, that's how I got my start in vegetable gardening. Every year my parents would give us a row in the vegetable garden, and we would sow those $1 seed packets, and we were just so excited. We never knew what we were going to get. So our goal growing up was always just to, you know, it was a challenge, something different. But your goal for vegetable gardening might be a little bit different. Maybe you want it to be organic. Maybe you want it to be inorganic. Maybe you want to have a theme garden. I know my daughter, she loves pizza. So this year we're going to try to do a pizza garden where we grow everything that we might need to, make pizza sauce. So the herbs, the tomatoes, maybe some peppers and that sort of thing. So what is your goal? That's my question to you. The very first thing we want you to figure out is, what do you want to get out of this garden? And if you don't know what that is, then that's the first place you need to start. And again, your goals could be different. Maybe you just want to add some fresh vegetables to your diet that you don't have to go to the grocery store and purchase. Maybe you want to know exactly where those vegetables are coming from. Um, so yeah, just think about what is your goal. That's the very first thing that we want you to start with. This next slide, again, is just kind of an overview of what we're going to cover. So what do you need to consider if you are just starting a vegetable garden? We're going to go around over each one of these individually in more detail. So the very first thing I tell folks is you need to grow what you like. Tomatoes are the #1 grown backyard vegetable in the United States, but if you don't like tomatoes, there's no point in putting tomatoes in your garden, right? So just because your neighbor grows tomatoes or just because your neighbor grows cucumbers or tells you you should try cucumbers, there are no real rules as to what you have to put in your vegetable garden. It's whatever you like. I'm going to share some information here in a minute about some research that was done at Washington State University Extension that has to do with what vegetables have the best value, or which vegetables you can tell the most difference from store-bought to homegrown. So maybe that'll give you some ideas if you really don't know, where to start with gardening and vegetable gardening in particular. So this is some information that I found. Again, this came from the Old Farmer's Almanac of which plants are the gardener's favorite vegetables. So these are the top 10 most popular homegrown vegetables. I'm wondering if you all will agree with this chart or not, but the very first one on the list, which I've said earlier, is tomatoes. So 85% of people that grow vegetables in their backyard grow tomatoes, which I think is pretty interesting. And if you have questions in particular about growing tomatoes, next Tuesday, Sherry and I will be hosting a webinar or a Zoom class on how to get the most out of your tomatoes and how to grow really successful tomatoes. So we'll post that link at the end of this presentation if you haven't registered or if you're interested in doing so. So after tomatoes comes peppers, 58%, onions, cucumbers, green beans, lettuce, carrots, corn. The two that really surprised me on this list would be radishes and cabbage. I don't really know very many folks that get too excited about cabbage, but I do like some homegrown cabbage. We do make sauerkraut every year, so we do grow a lot of cabbage in our garden. But it definitely has some pests and other challenges that go along with it. So here is this list that I was referencing a couple minutes ago. This was research that came out of Washington Extension. So if you take a look at this chart, it tells you the vegetable on the left-hand side, the garden and store difference in quality, production per square foot, and then relative monetary value. So I think that's covers a lot of bases. So basically what you're looking for is something that has high in all three of these categories, and that's what you would want to grow if you really don't know where to start. So things like green beans, they have a medium difference between store versus garden. They have a high production value per square foot, and relative monetary value is medium. So if we go down through this list, there aren't a whole lot of them that actually are high all the way across. One that really surprised me was green onions. So that might be one that you want to try. Super easy to grow. You can start them really early in the season, so there's something you can get, one of the first things that you can start harvesting. Another one that surprised me was rhubarb. It has high production per square foot, and it has a high relative monetary value. So we are going to be sending these fact sheets out, or this PDF, I'm sorry, this PowerPoint PDF out after the presentation. So you can reference this site if you're interested. We would put the link at the bottom, so you'll be able just to click on it, and you can use it for your research later on. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was What do you need to consider the next step in planning is how much space do you have to work with? I always tell folks that they should start small with vegetable gardening. It's very easy to be excited this time of year and to think, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do humongous things. But it's also very easy to get overwhelmed. And if gardeners get overwhelmed, it tends to be not good for anybody. It's not good for the garden. It's not good for the gardener. It's probably not good for your family and friends. And it's not going to be something that you're going to enjoy if you're overwhelmed. So start really small. If nothing else, I hope that you just get a little bit of inspiration today to start or try one new vegetable that you've not done yet. One easy thing to do would be to start with a salad box. The University of Maryland Extension has this great plan on how to build your own salad box, which kind of reminds me of just like a cabinet drawer. The other easy thing, if you're not really into building things with, nuts and bolts and nails and hammers and wood, you can just take a cardboard box. That's a great way to start with some lettuce. Lettuce does not need really deep soil. Take a cardboard box, fill it up with some potting soil or growing media, and put your lettuce seeds right in there. By the end of the lettuce's life cycle, so about 50 to 60 days, the box will still be intact, but after that, you can just add it to your compost pile. It's all biodegradable, the cardboard, the soil, the roots from the lettuce after you harvest it. So it's a really easy way to just get your foot in the door and start gardening and get some fresh vegetables into your diet. Again, we have the link there if you want to learn how to build a salad box. There's also plans on there for a salad table, which is a larger extension of a salad box, and also um, some really good information. I think there's a couple of videos on how to do it as well. So your location is the next most important thing you need to think about when starting a vegetable garden or planning your vegetable garden. Vegetables need at least 6 hours of direct sunlight. The more sunlight they have, the better they're going to do. So that means better they're going to produce. Less stressed vegetables mean they're less likely to get diseases and also less likely to be maybe impacted by pests like insects. So make sure that when you're thinking about sunshine, that we have 6 to 8 hours of that direct sun. So if you don't know, it's really easy to go out and walk around your yard or property and do a test. Just see, early in the morning, where does the sun hit? In the afternoon, at lunchtime, where does the sun hit? In the evening, is there anywhere that's still sunny? It's an easy way to just go out and really test it to see. Some exceptions to this 6 to 8 hours of sunlight would be things like lettuce or leafy greens. They can do a little bit less, so probably like 4 to 6 hours, they would be okay. Again, but if you're going to put a tomato or some plant that really, really likes a lot of sunshine, you got to have a lot of sun. Okay, so tomatoes and peppers and anything that's considered to be warm season, which Sherry's going to talk to us a little bit more about in a little bit. Make sure that you do have that full sun. Okay. So sun is certainly essential to plant growth, and that's all because of this process of photosynthesis. Without full sun, the plant cannot photosynthesize at its most efficient amount. So therefore, the plant may not do as well as it could if it doesn't have the amount of sun. And you might think, well, there are some plants that don't need as much sun, and a lot of times you'll see that on plant tag requirements. So if you look at the little plastic tags whenever you go to the greenhouse on the transplants, you'll see that, especially on flowers. You'll see like the half sunshine mark or full shade to let you know that those plants can be just fine to be in less than full sun, but not most garden vegetables. The next thing you need to think about would be the plant requirements for water. So what does that plant need when it comes to water? And again, just like the sunlight, a lot of your garden vegetables are going to need a lot of water, especially when we talk about raised beds or container gardening. Water tends to be the element that is least present, so therefore it's the most limiting factor for most of your garden plants. If you think about it in a container setting, a tomato needs about 6 gallons of water per week, and that's per plant. So that might surprise a lot of people, but that's a lot of water. We also sometimes say about an inch of natural rainfall. I think that's kind of hard to gauge what that actually means. So we tell people that it's the equivalent to about 6 gallons per square foot. So it takes a lot of water to keep these plants happy, healthy, and producing. And, where is your water going to come from if you're just starting a garden? That's something that's really important to think about. If you have to, I always tell people, if you have to go to the back 40 to water your plants and you're tired after a long day's work, the chances of your plants getting watered that day is going to diminish. So if you have them right on your deck, or just a few feet from a water hose, where it's really easy and efficient, they're more likely to get water. And the more likely they are to get water, the happier and healthier they're going to be, and the better they're going to produce for you. So that means more yummy tomatoes, more fresh lettuce, all those yummy things that you want to have to eat. So some different ways of how you can get water if you don't just have an outlet like a water spigot. You can use a watering can or a bucket. Again, that's going to be okay for a while, but you may get tired of doing that after a while. So just think about that. Rain barrels, they're a good option for a lot of your ornamentals. We don't always recommend rain barrels for vegetable gardening, especially not once the fruits or vegetables start to come on your plants. Just because we don't always know what could be coming off of your rooftop. There could be things that leach out of the roofing material. There could be animal feces or animal waste on the roof that you don't want to be contaminating your vegetables with. Okay. I see that Sherry wrote in the comments that it's best to water in the morning. That's always great advice. So thank you, Sherry. I don't know, do you want to talk about that, or you just want to put that in the comments?
I was just trying to keep up with all these questions that are here in the chat box. So yeah, I mean, it is best to water in the morning. In the middle of the day is really not a good time because you have the heat of the sun and it can evaporate your water, so it's not as efficient. Also, if you have raindrops on your leaves and you have full sun on there, you can get kind of like this magnifying effect and it'll actually burn your leaves. The evening is okay. It's not quite as good. It's better if your plants are dry going into the evening hours so as to reduce possibility of having diseases, fungal growth and that sort of thing. That's why in the morning is the best, because if your leaves do get wet, they have the whole day to dry, and it just helps to reduce problems with diseases.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's a great explanation. And that's really good advice, like Sherry said. We want to keep our plants healthy and happy, so follow that advice. And there's also, if you're really serious in establishing this garden, if you're not just starting out, there are a lot of in-ground watering systems like soaker hoses and drip irrigation systems that are really quite efficient at watering your plants, and they're very economical. They're not that expensive to set up. So that's something we can explore if you guys have questions about that. Towards the end, we can talk a little bit more about that. But the last thing I just wanted to make sure that I reiterate about this is that the water source needs to be convenient for you. The harder it is, the more you have to fight the water. Again, the less likely it's going to be that you're going to water them as much as they maybe need to be watered. Okay, so now we're getting into some pretty technical information about frost-free dates. So how long is your growing season? Does anybody already know this? Maybe you already do know how many days your growing season is. To figure that out, you have to know approximately when you're going to get your last spring frost, and you need to know when you could potentially get your first killing frost. So you would take those dates and count the days in between the frost dates of your growing season. And if you don't know, you can go to this garden.org/app/frost-dates and enter your zip code, and they will tell you approximate dates. Again, every year is a little bit different. We don't always know what we're going to get, but this gives you a good idea of when you could maybe be getting a frost. And then, of course, we have the fall frost-free date. So for here in Garrett County, I live near Oakland, so my frost-free date is going to be June the 5th. For the most part, that's the date we tell folks. So anytime before that, I shouldn't be planting anything that's frost sensitive outside. So tomatoes, cucumbers, anything that could be killed by a frost shouldn't be going outside prior to that. Okay. And then I could potentially get my first killing frost around September 15th. So for me, where I live, that's only about 17 weeks, about 120 days. So I have a pretty short growing season. So therefore, whenever we talk about what plants can I grow in that amount of time, we're going to share different charts with you that tell you exactly how many days it takes for plants to produce. So I'll share those here in a minute. The other tool I wanted to share with you would be your USDA cold hardiness zone, which this isn't super important when we talk about annuals, but when we're talking about perennials, so those plants that come back year after year, you definitely want to check your hardiness zone before you purchase any of those. Again, you'll have this link, but the plant hardiness note, hardiness .ars.usda.gov with all those letters at the end. This will be the website that if you enter that, this little map pops up and you can actually enter your zip code to figure out what your hardiness zone is. So here's Maryland's, for those of you that are in Maryland. Again, quite different from the coast all the way up here to the mountains. That tells you a little bit, again, it just gives you an idea of what the climate's going to be like and how cold it's going to get. And again, along with your growing season, the lower your hardiness zone is, the shorter your the shorter growing season is going to be. So, using that information of once you figure out how long your growing season is when you can move into figuring out, how are you going to plant your plants? Are you going to seed them directly, or do you have to buy them as transplants? Again, here in Garrett County, I only have 120 days to really work with. So a lot of times my plants have to go in as transplants for things that are really long and take a long time to harvest. So this next chart that I'm going to show you is something from the University of Maryland Extension Home and Garden Information Center. This is a vegetable planting calendar, and one thing that I love it tells you each of your crops. In the red, it tells you how many days to germination. So if you're like me, I get really anxious once I plant a vegetable or plant a seed. And I think, why isn't it up yet? So this chart helps me to calm down and say, okay, it could take 12 days for my lima beans to come up. And then the part in the green, the days in the green tell you how many days to harvest from seeding. So Brussels sprouts, they can take anywhere from 80 to 100 days. Cantaloupes, 100 to 128 days. So therefore, I know that I cannot seed my cantaloupes directly outside very often and actually get them because I only have 120 days to begin with. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. Again, this is a smaller version, but if you go to this website at the bottom, you can figure out, you can download this chart and use it for your advantage. The yellow bar, it does tell you the yellow is what time of year you should start seeds inside to grow them into transplants. The light baby blue bar tells you when you can plant those seeds directly in the ground. So for example, beets for Central Maryland, they can be planted around the beginning of April outside. The darker blue color is when you can plant cold hardy seedlings outside. Orange is telling you when you can plant warm weather crops directly in the ground. So you can see things like beans, lima beans, and snap beans. They can go in usually around mid-May. Up here in the mountains, we have to adjust for, again, about 2 weeks to the right-hand side, so around the beginning of June for most of our beans. But again, this is one of my favorite tools. I hope that you will take time to visit the site and download this chart because I think it can be very helpful when you're trying to figure out, what you want to plant and how long it's going to take to plant things. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this one. This is a source came from California Agriculture Extension, and it just tells you a lot of information. Your crops are on the left-hand side. soil temperature across the top, and then it has your cool season and your warm season vegetables, and it tells you how many days, so these numbers in the middle are how many days it actually took for the plants to germinate. So again, this is a little advanced if you're just starting out. The whole point of it is that cool season crops, they still have to have, you know, around 60-degree temperatures to germinate, 60-degree soil temperatures. And your warm season definitely need a little bit warmer, so around the 80s, 80, 60, even up to 90 to get them to germinate. So for your reference. These are, again, another chart that tells you, Sherry's going to talk a little bit more about season extension or succession planting. So some of these crops, they can take a lot of cold weather. So just, again, just for your reference, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this chart either. And then one more piece of information for you to research out. This is, again, another planting chart that came from University of Maryland Extension and the Home and Garden Information Center. Again, it has your crops on the left-hand side, tells you approximately when you can plant them. It also tells you how many feet you need to plant in a row for each person in your family, how many seeds you can get per 100-foot row, how deep to plant them, the distance between your rows, and then planting distances within each row. So again, if you're just starting out in vegetable gardening, I really like this chart just because it really gives you a lot of good information. And it's 2 pages. The second page here tells you, again, once you get the slides and in the next day or so, you should be able to click on that link and you can download all of these charts and print them out for your planning your garden purposes. I wanted to talk just a few minutes about your budget. You know, everyone gets excited about wanting to start, especially on a sunny day, but we just wanted to put this kind of in as a, you know, don't forget that it will take a lot of time and a lot of hard work, and plants don't really need fancy things. So even though you might want to invest in the latest tools and gadgets and things like that, it's not always needed. So if you're just starting out in vegetable gardening, sometimes less is more. The more you can work with nature, the better off you'll be. Your seeds are always going to be way more cost efficient than buying transplants or plugs or anything like that. Starting your own can be more efficient than buying transplants. But again, if you end up having to buy a lot of specialty equipment to do that, it is definitely cheaper just to go to the local greenhouse and buy 6 tomato plants. So just a word of caution. We don't want to deter anybody, but definitely is something to think about. How much money do you want to invest in this vegetable gardening experience or adventure? So what are some different types of vegetable garden? So we're going to talk just briefly about if you're just starting out, if you want to start a container vegetable garden, a raised bed vegetable garden, or an in-ground vegetable garden. And Miss Sherry is going to tell us first about container gardening.
All right, can you all see my screen now? Slideshow.
Yes, we can see, Sherry.
From the current slide.
Yes, ma'am.
Come on. Sorry guys. There, no. Ashley,
You're okay.
Aren't I? Okay. That didn't transition as well as I would have liked to. Anyway, all right. So we're going to talk about growing in containers. So the great thing about containers is it's just really easy to get started with this. All you need is some kind of a container that is food safe and it's got drainage holes in it. You want to make sure that your container is going to have a large enough volume of soil to support whatever plant you want to grow in it. Larger plants like tomatoes need at least 5 gallons, so you could get a 5-gallon bucket and put some holes in it, and you've got yourself a planter for a tomato. Something like peppers might only need like a 3-gallon container, and lettuce you could grow in a window box that you would put on your back porch on the deck. So it's really easy to get started, doesn't cost a whole lot of money. It's perfect for kids, people with physical limitations. If you have a hard time bending over, if you have stuff growing in containers, you can put them on top of tables or benches or whatever so that you don't have to bend over so much, and it can be more at a good height for you to work with your plants. It can also be great if you're a gardener who wants to downsize, and like I've just done, I decided to give my vegetable garden to the chickens. So I got chickens this year, and I put a chicken coop in there, and they have taken over my vegetable garden space. So the things that are really important to me, I have put in pots. So I have spinach and lettuce growing in boxes on my deck. Carrots you can grow them in containers as well. In fact, I find it easier to grow carrots in containers because I have really clayey soil, and I have a hard time getting them to grow in that, but they grow great in a soilless potting mix. Just make sure that it's deep enough, your container's deep enough to grow whichever kind of carrot you're growing. Some are short, like Nante's type, and while others are quite long. So just match your container to the plant that you want to grow. It's a lot less work. There's no digging or tilling. Generally weed free. You only have a couple weeds here and there to pull out. And also can help you if you have problems in your yard where you're trying to grow things, like it might be too shady in where you usually have your garden. So if you have a sunny spot that's on a hardscape part of your property, like a deck or a sidewalk, you could put a pot there for your tomato or peppers. If you have poor quality soil, this is a workaround for that, as well as raised beds. Also, if you have some kind of a persistent soil-borne disease issue where you're every time you plant your vegetables in this soil, they get some kind of disease and die. Well, that's something that really can't rectify without replacing the soil. So a better idea would be to either choose a different spot or use containers or raised beds. Okay, so some other advantages besides that, it's easier to protect your plants from extreme weather because they are in containers. You can easily move them. So you can bring them inside your house or inside your garage. And that also means that you can start earlier in the spring and extend the season in the fall. You can leave things out longer because you can bring them in at night. So if you have freezing temperatures at night, no worries, bring them inside. I do that a lot. So I just lay a vinyl tablecloth on the floor, and I bring my pots in and set it on that. It does take some work, but where there's a will, there's a way. Also, you can think about growing things vertically from hanging pots. I currently have some herbs growing in a hanging planter on my back porch. You can grow tomatoes, just about anything in a container. That's the great thing about containers, as you might not have thought about it, but you can grow just about anything in a container, and that includes fruit shrubs. I used to work for a blueberry, raspberry, strawberry breeder, and we grew everything in pots in a greenhouse. So yes, we grew blueberry bushes, blackberries, raspberries, and strawberries all in pots, and they did very well. So it is possible. Just one thing you have to remember when doing that is you're going to have to water more frequently. And because you are running water through your soil more frequently, it is removing nutrients with it more frequently. So it means you also have to fertilize more often. Okay, location. So your containers can be placed on any kind of a level surface. It could be on your deck, your balcony rail. If you live in an apartment, if you have a balcony with a rail, you could put some window boxes out there, and you could at least have lettuce and some fresh herbs, and that's a great thing. Hanging boxes, window boxes, okay, all kinds of good places to put containers. Now, for warm season crops, which we'll describe in a little bit, you need 6 to 8 hours of sun. Make sure your containers are getting that kind of sun for those warm season vegetables. And for your cool season crops, it only needs, around 4 hours of sun for those. And when you are planting your containers, make sure you put them near a water source that your hose can reach that far, because you may not want to lug a watering can a long distance, to water your plants. It might make you not water as often as you should. So just consider that. And also be careful or consider if you have a really large container and you're going to fill it with soil, that could be really heavy. So put your container where you want it first and then fill it with soil, just so you don't hurt yourself trying to move it. If you put stuff on your deck, be aware that, when the water drains out of your pots, it could leave some staining on your deck, so you can put some dishes underneath. Probably what would be best is to have some kind of a dish with little feet on it so that's raised up off of your deck if you want to try and protect those surfaces. And also consider microclimates throughout your yard. So if you are growing a warm season crop, you find a place in your yard, on your property where you're living, that has the most amount of sun, where it's the warmest. So for me, it's on the south side of the house, and I grow my tomatoes and peppers there, and they're up against the house, and the house radiates out heat in the evening. So those kinds of plants like that. So that's where I put those warm season plants. And then for my cool season crops like lettuce and spinach, I have them in a place that is only part sun, so it stays cooler for them. So just consider that. You don't want to put some cool season crops up against the house on the south side of the house, because you might fry them. They might not be too happy about that. Okay, with that, I will hand it over to Ashley, and she can talk about raised beds.
Okay, thank you. So raised beds are kind of similar to containers. They're just a lot larger in size. Depending on how you manage your raised beds, they can be considered kind of like a container, as far as if you're going to fill the raised bed with, as Sherry said, like soilless garden soil or soilless growing media, which would be kind of like a potting soil or something like that. Sherry, can we go back 2 slides, please? There you go. Thank you. So again, raised beds have a lot of the same advantages as containers, as far as, if you have limited space in your garden, if you have poor soils or too rocky soils or bad drainage, or anything like that, then a raised bed could be a great option for you to try to think about. Again, they're not always the best. We have a couple disadvantages. Sherry, if we'd go ahead and move forward to the next slide. One of the main disadvantages with them would be that they're expensive to start up. So if you're not sure that gardening is something that you're going to stick with, you might want to consider waiting a couple years or a couple seasons to invest in starting a raised bed, just because the materials themselves can cost a little bit of time, a little bit of money. So you can make them, almost out of anything, wood, stone, cinder blocks, anything like that can go into your raised bed construction. You can see they can go anywhere from 6 inches deep all the way up to 2 feet or 4 feet if you're trying to get them up off the ground, so they're easier, like for bending over or physical limitations or anything like that. Again, you can fill them with a soilless growing media, or you could fill them with just topsoil, if you can get topsoil bulk, or if you have topsoil there at your property. It really just depends on what your goals are for them. Again, if you are going to use a topsoil, then they're going to be more closely related to managing them more like an in-ground garden, and you might need to kind of use them more, like take a soil sample and do more soil amendments. If you are going to fill them with the soilless growing media, then you might be better off to manage them more like a container. Hopefully
Ashley,
that makes sense. Yes.
Ashley, I'm going to stop sharing so that you can share your screen, okay?
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sherry. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to talk again. I talked a little bit about the disadvantages of the raised beds. One of them would be cost. The second main disadvantage would be that they tend to dry out a lot more quickly. So if you're used to gardening in ground or something like that, uh, raised beds really do make a huge difference in the amount of water that the plants need. So just be cautious of that. Again, you want to have them near a water source, or maybe even consider doing in-ground watering systems like a drip irrigation system or something like that. So just be mindful of that. Some other disadvantages is that raised beds are generally fairly small. When you are starting a raised bed, you don't want to make it any wider than 4 feet wide because you can't reach either side, so then you end up having to get in there. So that can be a problem. The whole point of a raised bed is to kind of limit soil compaction and things like that. So if you can get to both sides of the raised bed, make it 4 feet wide. If you can only get to one side of it, like if it's going up against a house or a building, only make it 3 feet wide. What else do we want to talk about with raised beds? So a lot of times people do manage them very intensely. So we do end up putting a lot of plants in a small space. So if that's something that you are interested in doing, just be forewarned that you can get a lot of plants in there, but sometimes we get too many in there and it can increase some of our pest and fungus or foliar diseases. The other disadvantage is that they're not great for sprawling vegetables, so like winter squash or um, watermelons or cantaloupes or things like that. They don't do super well in a raised bed. I mean, they'll grow well, but they tend to use a lot of your space. So if you are going to put them in a raised bed, consider maybe putting them on a trellis or something like that. And Sherry is going to share some really great pictures and fun ideas for getting you growing vertically towards the end of the presentation. So the next type of system that we see people doing a lot with vegetable gardening would be your traditional in-ground gardening system. So the advantage to this is that if you have, if you have soil, if you have a garden, if you have space, if you have a yard, you pretty much have, unlimited space to turn it into a vegetable garden. The main disadvantages are that depending on where you live, you could have some soil types that are not that great. You could have a lot of heavy soils, like we have a lot of what we consider loamy clay or clay loam soils here in my area. So it can take a lot of management, a lot of amendments to get it so it's easier to work. Um, you get a lot of weed competition with an in-ground garden, so you have to be prepared for battling weeds. And also the first year with removing, if it's in a sod or in a turf situation, can be kind of challenging. So in-ground gardening is how I've always gardened. There are some methods like no-till methods like lasagna gardening, where you would start the season before you want to build a vegetable garden. You would pick an area, you would either lay it down with cardboard or newspaper, and then you would just start layering kind of like a compost pile on top of that. So different like um, lawn clippings, compost, things that your house waste, so like kitchen scraps and things like that. You would just layer that all on top of the area that you want to garden next year, and then um, you would start that like in the fall of the year, and then the next season you really don't have to do any tilling. You could just plant directly into that compost pile that you kind of made. Again, it's kind of like lasagna, just because you have different types of layers. You can Google that or use a search engine to look up lasagna gardening if you want to learn more about it. The other thing you can do for the first season is just to do cardboard or again, a couple layers of heavy newspaper, put that directly on top of your sod, and then place either topsoil or potting soil right on top of the cardboard and plant directly in there for the first season. As the roots, as the rain and moisture break down the cardboard and break down the potting, the newspaper, then you can actually the roots will go right down through that and start to grow into the sod. You'll get a nice layer of microorganisms and macroorganisms like earthworms that are really happy because of that moisture. And lots to eat. So that's a great way to start an in-ground garden very efficiently without having to have a tiller or find somebody to do plowing or anything like that. So a little bit about your soil. We've said the word growing media versus soil a couple times. I just wanted to hit on that real quick. So if you go and you dig in your backyard, we call that the natural soil. So whatever you find whenever you go and dig a hole, a fence post, to plant a tree or a shrub, that's your natural soil. And depending on where you live, it's going to have some percentage of sand, silt, and clay particles. We call those the organic or the mineral components. So again, the perfect soil would be an equal part sand, silt, and clay, which makes it kind of in this loamy area. Most people in the States don't have that perfect soil, so you end up having to do some different amendments to make it perfect. Growing media or soilless growing media would be what you go to the store and purchase in a bag, and it's usually called potting mix or something like that, and it's man-made. It's not what you find naturally occurring in that mixture. It's all natural elements like peat moss, perlite, and vermiculite. Those are usually the first three things that you see added to a potting mix. And it's blended perfectly for good water retention, for good drainage. It's sterile, so there's no weed, seeds, or anything like that. So that's what we usually recommend for using whenever you're starting a container garden. That's what it's designed for, is containers, or for use in greenhouse settings and cell packs or things like that. If you are going to be doing an in-ground garden or a raised bed with naturally occurring soil or topsoil, we do recommend that you soil test every 3 years just to find out what nutrients are there, especially with pH is really important. And if you live in an area maybe that's had buildings on it at one point or the other, it's also important to test for lead to make sure that there's no lead that could leach out into your vegetables and cause you to get sick. So you can have those tests done, usually somewhere between $15 and $25 to get a good baseline sample of, again, you really want to make sure you have your pH. And again, if you think there could be potential for lead contamination, then you want to have that lead sample done too. One last thing, you want to make sure that you do add the lime in the fall of the year. In the fall of the year is a great thing to do, but you don't want to add any type of fertilizer until the spring, really close to the time that your plants are going to need it. I just wanted to hit on this real quick about why soil pH is so important. If you look, most garden vegetables, with the exception of potatoes, they all like to go somewhere between 6.5 on the pH scale. We aim for 6, 7 is what we tell folks. And you can see, if you look at this chart, if you find 6 or 7 at the bottom of your screen and you look all the way up through there, the 3 top nutrients are what we consider the macro nutrients that plants need in the largest quantity to grow. And then the last several there on this chart are the micros. So they need less of them, but they're still really important and essential to plant growth. So you can tell that if your pH is wrong, so if it's down around 4, you have to have a lot more of those nutrients because they're just not available to the plant. And you can see if it goes too high, the same thing is true on some of the other nutrients, that it's just not, they're just not as available. So remember that whenever you're thinking about pH. Most garden vegetables, again, 6.5 or 6.5, with the exception of potatoes. They like it a little more acidic to try to avoid some of the scab diseases that we might see showing up. And I just wanted to share this resource with you. Again, the link's here at the bottom, but it's for the Home and Garden Information Center with University of Maryland Extension. And they have this great chart, great resource page for you on how to start or plant a vegetable garden in 6 basic steps. Lots of great external links on containers and raised beds, a lot of really nice videos and fact sheets and things like that. So again, just for your reference if you have questions. And I wanted to talk about some of the best crops to start with if you are just wanting to plan your garden for the first time. Your tomatoes, again, if you like tomatoes, if you're going to be doing them in a container, I recommend some, probably determinate varieties are going to be a little bit easier than your indeterminate. Again, if you want to learn about tomatoes, we'll be doing that next Tuesday. We'll be learning all about how to grow tomatoes. Peppers, they can be really rewarding. Be forewarned that they need a lot of sunlight and they really like hot weather, but they also need some moisture. And they actually don't like a whole lot of fertilizer, so don't over fertilize your peppers, especially not with nitrogen. That can tend to give you too much green leafy growth and not a lot of fruit. Cucumbers, again, really easy to start with. Don't be too disappointed when you first see your first summer squash flowers and your first cucumber flowers. A lot of those are going to be your male flowers, so they don't have any fruit on them, so those flowers will actually fall off. That's Mother Nature's way of making sure that the male flowers are available for pollination of the females when they come on later. Bush beans, if you're looking for something, again, really super easy to grow, you can actually plant them 2 or 3 times in one season. So you have fresh green beans all year round, or all season long at least. Lettuce likes it in the shoulder season, so it really likes it in April through June. And then again, you can seed it again for fall, for September through November. Leafy greens are always a win too. Again, they're super easy to grow. So again, if you're looking for a few vegetables to start with, this is our list. I just wanted to mention a couple things about crop rotation. Again, if you're in a raised bed or a container situation, crop rotation isn't super important. If you're in an in-ground garden situation where you're going to be using the same plot year after year, you might want to consider grouping your vegetables by family. So then next year you could take where you had your tomatoes or your solanaceous family and put a different crop in that area. By doing crop rotation, it can kind of help reduce insect and disease problems. It can also help not mine your soil, as they say, so it kind of helps use different plants use different amounts of different nutrients. So therefore, if you mix them up year after year, sometimes your soil won't get as depleted of nutrients as quickly. We're not going to talk a lot about that. The other thing I wanted to mention for people that are on the call that maybe are experienced gardeners, if you want to try something new, there's a lot of information about companion planting, what plants should grow well together or do really well together. So I put 2 links in here that you could visit if you're interested in learning more about companion planting. Not every source matches up, so don't get too excited if something doesn't quite jive from source to source. But again, if you're just looking for something different to try, companion planting can be something really fun to learn more about. I've started doing nasturtiums in with my cucumbers and in with my squash to help beat squash bugs. I can't tell a whole lot of difference. I don't think it hurts anything, and I think nasturtium flowers are pretty, so it makes my garden interesting and gives me something to talk about with my friends. So companion planting, check it out. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sherry. I'm going to stop sharing. Sherry, I will take over the chat, and you can share your screen and talk about succession planting and growing on trellises and upward vertically. Is there any questions you wanted to address with anything so far? Or are we doing okay?
I think I'm keeping up, but if we missed anything, please forgive us and go ahead and re-enter it in the chat box, and Ashley will try to answer. And also, depending on what time we finish, we may have some time for question and answer through the chat, but we'll see. So right now I'm going to share my screen. Sorry, We got to do this transition here, and we're going to talk about succession planting. And let's see, I don't really know why it does that to me. So we'll just get down here up to crop rotation and what is succession planting? Okay, so succession planting is basically a way for you to get maximum yields out of your vegetable garden. It's a way to use your available space across seasons so that you can get the biggest yields possible. So it results in a continuous harvest from spring through fall, but it does require planting. Okay, oops, I went backwards. Okay, so one of the best ways to figure out how to succession plant is, first of all, to gather information, and some of the best places for you to gather information is from the back of your seed packets. It's going to tell you how long it takes for the seeds to germinate, how long it takes from time of germination to time of harvest. It will tell you how deep to plant your seeds. It will tell you when you can plant your seeds outside or when is a good time to start them indoors. It will tell you how far apart to space your plants in rows. Okay, so that's all kind of information that you need to gather when planting your garden. And another thing to consider is frost dates. And that's going to be different depending on your hardiness zones. So for me, where I live, well, let's just say where I live, say the frost date is for spring, the last one is May 15th. Well, then October 15th would be the first frost you could expect in the fall. So that means my growing window is between May 15th and October 15th. So you're going to need that information to figure out what you can plant when and for how long, and that's going to give you good information for planting. I have a link here for the garden.org, which would help you figure out what frost dates are in your area. Also, you need to consider, the plants that you're growing, are they cool weather crops or warm weather crops? And that's going to dictate when you can grow them. Okay, so when planting, you need to consider how long it takes for each of your crops to come to maturity so that you can harvest them. And you'll notice here I've got a list of vegetables, and most of them are between 50 and 60 days, and that's from the time of germination. Some exceptions are pumpkins. They take about 100 to 120 days. So that's one thing you're not going to succession plant. It just takes too long for it to reach maturity. There are some things that mature very quickly, and that would be radishes and lettuce. And spinach is a little bit behind that at 40 to 50 days, and turnips are pretty fast too. So for these things that mature quickly, you can have a succession of plantings of those vegetables. Okay, so for your cool season vegetables, I have a list here, and it tells you when you can plant them, and it depends on the temperature of your soil, not the temperature of the air, but the temperature of your soil. Okay, and you're like, well, how can I measure the temperature of your soil? Well, what matters is the temperature of the soil in the root zone of where your plants are going to be. So you could take a thermometer and plant it, or not plant it, but put it in your soil maybe a couple inches deep, and you could check that and see what the temperature is. So you can plant lettuce, peas, radish, and potatoes when the soil temperature is as low as 40 to 45 degrees. Potatoes, we usually say you plant those after St. Patrick's Day. And then the next things that you can grow as the soil warms up to about 55 degrees would be your spinach and Swiss chard, beets, onions, carrots, collards, kohlrabi, parsnips, broccoli, kale, cabbage. Okay, so those would be your cool season vegetables. These are going to be the things that you want to plant in the spring and in the fall. And there are some of these that actually will not do well when it's hot out, such as peas, lettuce, radishes, and spinach tends to bolt too. So those are the things you will not want to plant in the middle of summer unless you live someplace mild, or you can put them in shade. Okay, so examples of your warm weather crops would be beans, cucumbers, eggplant, peppers, tomatoes, melons, winter squash, and summer squash. And you don't want to plant seeds or plug plants until you know there's not going to be any more chance of frost, and also when your soil temperatures are about 65 to 70 degrees. So the things that are not usually succession planted are those things that just have the longer growing seasons, because unless you live someplace subtropical, your growing season just isn't long enough for that. So that would include melons, winter squash, gourds, and pumpkins. So there are several types of succession planting. There could be continuous harvest of the same crop. Means I could start growing beans May 15th in my area. It takes about 60 days before I harvest. I could rip those plants out and then put in either new bean plants or new seeds and get a second crop of beans in the same space. Another type of succession planting would be an alternation of cool weather vegetables with warm weather vegetables in the same space. Or you could alternate different kinds of crops in the same space. So for continuous harvest of the same crop, you can do with most any vegetable within its window of growing opportunity. So you want to grow during the time when it's going to thrive. So for lettuces, you could put out new seeds every 2 weeks or transplants every 2 weeks. When it's cool out, like say maybe March 15th to June 1st, and then again in the fall. Cucumbers are a warm season crop, so you're going to have to wait till after your last frost, and they take about, if you put in plug plants, they would take about 60 days. You could harvest, pull them out, and then put in new plug plants and get another harvest in the fall. So you get the idea there. Now with cool weather crops, you could use successive plantings. You could probably get a couple plantings in of lettuce from March 15th to June 1st, where you would go through the entire growing season. You could harvest and then replant. Things like peas, it takes 60 days for that to mature. So you probably only get one planting of that in the spring and then again in the fall. If you're going to alternate in the same space, it's a great idea to do it with cool season, warm season, cool season alternation. So in the same space, I could plant leaf lettuce, say maybe even as early as March 15th, depending on where you live, what your hardiness zone is. That would take about a month, 5 weeks, and then I could harvest that and pull it out. And then I could plant bush beans in that same space. That would then take about 60 days after that. I could harvest those beans, pull out those plants, and then around August 1st, I could then plant some broccoli. So you get the idea of how we're alternating between cool season and warm season and then cool season again. So I have several scenarios there. You could plant spinach in the spring. Then when it's done and it bolts, because it tends to bolt when it gets warmer, you could plant some summer squash. When the squash is done planted, then you plant spinach again in the very same space. Okay, so now we're going to talk about ways in which to grow vertically. That's also going to maximize your growing potential by going vertical and not taking up so much space on the ground. It frees up space for you to plant other things. And as you see in this picture, I have constructed a very, very fine trellis there. I went into the woods in the back of my house, and I picked up 4 sticks that were about the same size, and I lashed them together with some cord, and then I was going to grow pole beans around that in amongst my kale and beets there. So, I mean, that's a very simple way. You can make a tripod for growing pole beans, or you could make some nicer looking structures. We have a nice trellis system on the right where you can see it's got some cordage on there for the squash to grow up. And then on the left is a little gazebo that has some wire on there that allows for beans and peas and squash to grow up. actually has a gourd hanging off of it. And here you have a picture of this is a winter squash. It's a Japanese winter squash called Tetsukabuto growing on a fence. And then you've also got pole beans growing on the fence. So I'm making use of vertical space in my garden. No space is going to waste. All right, next slide is a very nice trellis that was built by master gardeners in Washington County. This is at their demonstration garden. I think that's really pretty. So things that you can grow up on a fence or on a trellis would be anything that's binding. So you could train cucumbers, pole beans, winter squash, peas. Okay, those are all things that you can grow vertically. Okay. And then we mentioned earlier that, yeah, you can grow things in pots. So you could see in this greenhouse commercially, somebody is growing strawberries in pots. And something you may never have thought about is you can actually grow things in gutters. Now the gutters are only, regular gutters that you have on your house. You drill some holes in the bottom of that and you suspend them. And you can grow things in there that don't need a lot of root space. So you can't, grow really big vegetables in there, but you can grow things like strawberries or lettuce. You probably could do some beets and all kinds of leafy greens, okay? Another technique for reducing the amount of space on the ground that you need for growing things is called espalier, and that's when you train trees or shrubs to grow up on a fence. And so then it's just taking up a very minimal amount of space. Each branch is trained on a wire out laterally. And this is not a fruit tree, but I wanted you to see it because you can easily see the wire in the background that each of the lateral branches has been trained to grow on. This is an apple tree that we have in our demonstration garden in Allegheny County, which one of my master gardeners has trained each branch to grow out on a wire. And so this tree is taking up minimal space, but it's a way for you to include an apple tree in your landscape if you don't have a lot of space. Okay, here we see some more vertical growing. This is a commercial setup where you have plastic tubing with holes in it, and there's a irrigation system that goes down through those tubes to deliver water and nutrients to those strawberry plants. And then on the right, you just see simple pots with strawberries growing in them, and they're on kind of a ladder system, and they're staggered so that they each get enough light, but it's a way to make use of vertical space. And then finally, we have another use of vertical space just using grow bags. Okay, these are just plastic bags filled with soil, and you have holes in them at the bottom for drainage, and then you put a hole in the top for your plant. And then there is rigged up to it a watering system, and there's little black tubing that goes from the main line out to each plant and delivers the water and nutrients. So there are all kinds of ways to maximize your space and get the most out of your vegetable and fruit gardening. Okay, so we've come to the end of the presentation here, and I just also wanted to let you know that this is part of the Master Gardener Grow It, Eat It program, but we do have many other programs that you may be interested in. We generally have plant clinics at different locations. Baywise, native plants, composting, and pollinators are some other program areas that we focus on. And a great place for you to get information about home gardening is at our Home and Garden Information Center, and you can see the link there. It's extension.umd.edu/HGIC. Okay, so we would like for you to stick around. We have 3 quick polling questions. And then we may stick around for about 10 minutes. I'll talk to Ashley, see if she wants to do questions after that. But please stick around for the 3 polling questions. And I'm going to...
I think the polling questions should be up. So if you would please go ahead and answer those, we would very much appreciate it. And there are 3 questions, so make sure that you answer all 3 if you would, please. We have about 40% of folks who have answered, so keep on if you haven't, please. I did go ahead and enter the room for you to register for next week's for the tomato gardening class if you need that. Somebody asked about it. We had one question I just saw that came in about what type of mulch would you recommend for raised bed gardening? That I didn't get to answer that one yet. So, Sherry, you got any?
Raised bed gardening, I don't know. I usually use straw, clean straw.
You can use grass clippings.
Sure. Yeah. You just, if they're fresh grass clippings, then they could burn your plants. So don't put it right up against your plants. You know, pull it away from your plants. You can use shredded paper, and you can use shredded hardwood mulch. It will break down over time. Just don't mix it in with your soil because it will rob nitrogen from your plants as the soil organisms try to break it down.
Yeah, good advice. I had one lady ask, what type of organic pesticides do you recommend? I don't know if you want to get into that today or you want to.
Well, I can mention a couple. Of course, it depends on what the plant you're spraying and the pest you're trying to control as to which pesticides you're going to use. But I'll list some, and then as always, you must read the label before. You should do it first before you spray, and read all the instructions. The label is the law. But some organic pesticides that are out there are spinosad, which is actually a bacteria that is toxic to certain larvae, which could be either from beetles or moths or flies. And BT, there are different varieties of BT that also will do the same thing, help to control caterpillars and larvae of other insects. Let's see, sulfur and copper can be some organic ones. And
I like neem oil
neem,
too.
yeah. That's a good one. Some reduced risk pesticides would be horticultural oil or horticultural soap.
Yes, great information. All right, we had one question here. I have potato plants growing in the soil? Can I move them to grow beds? I would recommend not moving them once they're started because of the way you propagate potatoes. I'm sorry. You planted the potato eyes, so I don't really think that you could move them at this point. Your best bet would leave them there and maybe just get some additional seed potatoes and try to start from scratch again. What do you think, Sherry?
Oh yeah, I wouldn't move them after they started, yeah, unless you want baby potatoes.
Okay. How do you test soil pH easily? The best way I've found is just to send it to a laboratory. They have all the solutions already made up, and you don't have to worry about anything like that. A lot of the home test kits, I worry about them not being stored correctly. If you got them from a box store, maybe getting too hot or things like that. But that's just my opinion. Sherry, do you want to add anything about that?
No, I agree with that. The soil test is your best bet, most accurate.
Right, and you only have to do it every 3 years, so once you get a good baseline, it's not something you have to do every single year. Any ideas for flowers that can help deter squirrels?
No.
Yeah, I think your best bet would be some sort of maybe fence, like chicken wire, but they might get through that. That's kind of a hard one for sure.
Yeah, you could put like hot pepper sauce on your plants if you don't want them eating your plants. You could get a cat or a dog to patrol, but yeah, it's pretty hard to keep squirrels out.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a question about what's the purpose of mulch around your vegetable plants. So there are many purposes. One is to retain soil moisture. Another is to help reduce weeds, keeps them down. Another one is to actually help prevent disease issues because it covers the soil, and a lot of times fungal spores or bacteria are located on the soil surface, and when it rains, it can splash those pathogens up onto your plants. So actually mulch helps to reduce that. Do you have anything else to add, Ashley?
No, that's very good. Yes. I saw one up here. Oh, I lost it. Sorry. Is it too late to start lettuce seeds, or should I wait until fall? I think definitely. It depends on where you are, I guess.
Yeah.
But
If you're
you
in
might want to wait
Florida,
if you have a shady
it's too hot.
place. Right, exactly. You live along the coast, it's probably too hot. If you have a shady place where you can give them a little bit of protection so they don't bolt, though, you might be okay. There are some new varieties of like leafy greens that are supposed to be more heat tolerant too, so you might consider looking that up too. What are our thoughts or recommendations for weed control fabric? I,
I've never
I,
liked it.
oh no. Well, Sherry, you want to tell them why you don't like it, and then I'll tell them why I do like it.
Okay, it depends on what setting you're talking about, really. Um, I've had situations where it's great and situations where it's a pain in my butt. So if I put it weed control fabric in a flower bed, I find that that tends to be a pain because if you're constantly putting mulch down or working in that bed, you're getting soil on top of the fabric, the mulch breaks down, it turns into soil, and then you get weed seeds germinating in there, and then you've got to pull those weeds out when they've got their roots going down through that fabric. And it just makes it harder to remove the weeds, I think, than if there wasn't any fabric there at all. And a situation where it's great is in like a production system where you put down some really heavy fabric and you cut holes in it and say you grow, raspberry or blueberry bushes in it. That really helps to keep the weeds down and you're not constantly adding mulch or anything and you're keeping it clean and that works well. So what would you add, Ashley?
Yeah, I would add the exact sentiment that my experience is more in a commercial vegetable production setting. So for me, it works great. I have a high tunnel, so I put it down in there every year and I cut new holes. I don't have to fight any weeds that way. I've used it in my vegetable garden too. Um, my so this would be weed fabric and not plastic. I don't like the plastic because it's hard to pull up year after year, but the weed fabric. My only caution would be that make sure if you're going to put new fabric down that it doesn't have any type of herbicide mixed in it. Some of them have herbicides already in it to deter plants from growing. So just make sure if you are interested in doing that, that it doesn't have, pesticides or herbicides already mixed in there because that would not be good for your plants.
Somebody's asking about for container gardening, what should you look for to be sure the container is food grade? Actually, I've bought food grade 5-gallon buckets at Tractor Supply because farmers need to store feeds in it, or you could store honey in it, or whatever. That you could be certain that that's good. I'd say if you're recycling a bucket, just make as long as it didn't have some kind of chemicals in it. As long as you can clean it real well, it'd probably be okay. But, just be mindful of what was in it before, you started using it.
Yeah, good advice. All right. I don't know if we've missed some of these or not. I've kind of been going back and forth. I would just share the poll results real quick while we still have a few folks on. It looks like most folks found it to be they're going to renovate or start a new garden, so we appreciate hearing that. Looks like most people felt that it was worthwhile to take the class, increase their gardening skills and ability, and a lot of folks will be hopefully eating more of the fruits and vegetables that they produce. So we thank you guys
Yay!
for doing that. We will be sending out the PDF of the PowerPoint that we shared today. It probably won't be today that we get it out to everyone, but here, later in the week, as well as the recording, as long as it turned out well, we'll be posting that to our YouTube channel, Western Maryland Extension, Western Maryland Cluster of University of Maryland Extension. So we'll be posting that there as well. So anybody else?
Yeah,
We'll go
there's
through go ahead.
There was a question about what do you do for cucumber beetles? That's a hard one. You can plant later. I would put in plug plants that have a good bit of growth on them. If you can, delay your planting. That's going to help because those beetles tend to attack young plants and they don't always survive well. They also transmit diseases. You can keep those plants covered with row cover until they start to flower, and then you need to remove the row cover so that you can get pollination. You can also use something like, I believe you can use spinazad, but I'd have to read that label for those beetles if you want an organic pesticide.
Yeah, they're hard. I just
Yeah.
read yesterday that radishes are supposed to help with it as one of the companion
Oh,
plantings. So
yeah,
I'm
I've
I'm
read that
doing
too.
I'm doing nasturtium as well as radishes and with my
Yeah,
cucumbers in my tunnel this year. So ask me in a few months and maybe we'll have
yeah,
some firsthand experience. But
I'm
I
gonna
figure
do that too, Ashley.
a pack of radishes is really cheap. So if it deters
Yeah.
one cucumber beetle, I'm all for it.
Hmm. Somebody asked if we're going to continue doing these classes even after quarantine. And I think the answer is yes, because we're getting a much better response to online classes than we do when we offer them, in person. So I believe the answer is definitely yes.
Yes. So we appreciate everyone's support so much and we really
Absolutely.
enjoy all these questions and all the interaction. So
Yeah, I
with
wish we
that,
could see all of your faces and unmute you, but with so many people, there's too much noise in the background. It makes it difficult. But yeah, it would be lovely to see everybody's faces.
for sure. All right, with that, I think we'll go ahead and end. If we missed anybody's questions, I will put mine and Sherry's email in here if anybody wants to send us questions directly. Please do that. And we will go back through the chat here these last few minutes at least and make sure that we didn't miss anybody as soon as we end. Okay. Sherry, anything else? Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for being patient with me and new technology. Appreciate it.
You did a great job. All right, y'all, have a great day. Get outside and enjoy the beautiful sunshine.
Indeed. See y'all later.